I'm Madison. The year my world cracked cleanly into before and after was the one when I turned 13. If you wanted me to mark the exact instant my family decided I was background scenery in my own story, it wouldn't be some slow dawning. It was just a text message that arrived while I was standing by a vending machine at a desolate Arizona rest stop. The car is full. We will send someone back for you. Stay put. I stood there, backpack balanced on my knees, watching our family SUV vanish into the heat shimmer of the desert. I thought they were just repositioning the car for shade. Then I saw my older sister Brianna's face through the rear window. She had her phone in her hand, but she didn't look back. The betrayal was instant, cold, and completely unreasonable. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I waited for 6 hours at that rest stop as the desert sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The heat radiating off the asphalt was heavy, but the realization settling into my chest was heavier. I had spent my entire life acting as the quiet bridge in our house, the unseen middle child who kept things moving while my mother, Angela, chased social status and my sister, Brianna, curated her life for likes. I was the one who remembered where the keys were and made sure the bills didn't go past due a role they called being responsible, but I now realize they just meant useful. The stay put order in that text wasn't a plan, it was a disposal. They hadn't run out of room in the SUV. They had simply run out of interest in including me in their world. It was my uncle Nicholas who eventually found me. My mother always called him conceited because he refused to entertain their shallow drama and kept strict boundaries. But to me, his black sedan looked like a rescue vessel appearing in a mirage. He didn't offer me pity, a hug, or a lecture. He simply opened the door, looked at my sun-scorched face, and told me to get in. The transition from my parents' house to Nicholas's felt like moving to another planet entirely. Everything there was different, defined by a quality I couldn't yet name. At home, our cups were plastic souvenirs that smelled like the dishwasher, but Nicholas poured orange juice into a real glass that sparkled under the lights. I held it with trembling hands like it was a fragile legal agreement, afraid to even wrinkle the guest room sheets. He just raised an eyebrow and told me that things in life exist to be used and appreciated, not feared. For a long time, I lived in a state of quiet, hyper-vigilant compliance. This is what I call the invisible chain of a survivor. In a neglectful environment, you learn to become background scenery just to survive. You treat basic needs like trespassing because you've been conditioned to believe your existence is an inconvenience to those around you. I would hide the tags on new clothes Nicholas bought me, convinced he'd eventually realize I wasn't worth the investment and want to take them back. I would crouch over a cereal box in the kitchen at midnight because taking up space in the daylight felt like a risk my heart couldn't afford. Nicholas found me there one night and didn't yell about the mess or the hour. He just pushed a bowl of warm pasta toward me and said that if something is in his house, it belongs to everyone who lives there. He looked me in the eye and told me that meant me, too. That was the first time in 13 years I started to believe I wasn't just a visitor in someone else's story, but a permanent resident in my own life. Years passed under Nicholas's disciplined mentorship, and he treated my personal growth like a high-stakes investment in a structure worth keeping in perfect order. He frequently called it maintenance, the same way a master builder speaks about a foundation or a load-bearing wall. It was a routine check to ensure I finally understood I was worth being kept in working order. He taught me the complex art of the silent build, the two-part rule to save half and spend half so I would never have to rob my own tomorrow. He coached me on how to grip a hand with the authority of someone who never apologizes for taking up space. While my mother, Angela, and my sister, Brianna, spent those 15 years curating a digital mirage of family traditions and sisterhood that I was never once tagged in, I was learning to design landscapes and water systems meant to withstand the desert's harshest elemental shifts. I eventually emerged as a top landscape architect, a professional defined by clinical precision and strategic foresight qualities my biological family had never bothered to develop. My footing was firm, my independence was absolute, and I had long since de-romanticized my past. Then, after years of a silence that felt like a vault door, My mother suddenly reached out. There was no inquiry into my well-being, no how are you, and certainly no we have missed you. Instead, it was a clinical, transactional demand for $15,000. She claimed it was a social debt for a high-end resort event, an obligation she insisted I should shoulder simply because I was doing so well and lacked a real family of my own to bankroll. This is the psychological trap I call the normalization of cruelty. In a toxic dynamic, the aggressors genuinely believe their exploitation of you is just a standard family transaction. They do not see themselves as cruel. They see your hard-earned resources as a convenient extension of their own wallet. Angela wasn't making a request. She was attempting to overdraft a compassion she had never bothered to deposit. Clarity replaced the old need to please. I simply remembered that desolate Arizona rest stop and the searing heat of a 13-year-old's ultimate betrayal. I viewed the $15,000 not as a gift or a loan, but as the final invoice for my total freedom, the precise price required to permanently close the account on our shared DNA. I wired the money within minutes, treating it as a clean, analytical business transaction. Immediately after, I blocked her number on my work phone and my personal line. Sentiments are just corrupted files in a clean system. Inside my office, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of indisputable facts, rising numbers, and the quiet, lethal satisfaction of a debt that was finally, legally settled. When Nicholas passed away, he did so with the same quiet discipline that defined his life. He designated me as his sole executor, a final act of maintenance for a life that had finally come to rest. Angela and Brianna arrived at the funeral like scavengers scenting a fresh spill. They were draped in designer mourning gear, their dry eyes concealed behind oversized sunglasses while they dabbed at cheeks that held no genuine tears. Angela didn't even wait for the desert soil to settle before she cornered me. She whispered that we needed to discuss the $12 million resort property, insisting it was far too much for a single girl to manage alone. Brianna, meanwhile, stood near the casket and hearted a social media post about family legacy, treating our collective grief as a mere backdrop for her next viral aesthetic. They expected a total breakdown, or at least the return of the compliant daughter they had discarded years ago. Instead, I remained a mirage, calm, cold, and entirely professional. This moment revealed the silent regret of the watchman. Nicholas had spent years methodically preparing for this exact day. Taking me in hadn't just been an act of charity. It was a long-term strategic defense. He had watched his own family rot from within, caught between a dying hope that they might change and the hard reality of what they were doing to me. His pancreatic cancer diagnosis had served as his final deadline, the ultimate motivator to ensure the foundation he built for me was ironclad. Angela's attempts to gaslight me began almost immediately. She called me unstable and dramatic, trying to manufacture a narrative where I was too emotional to handle the complexity of the estate. She failed to realize that I was no longer the girl clutching a backpack at a rest stop. I was a landscape architect now, trained to spot the smallest crack in a facade. While they focused on the furniture and the bank balances, I was working with Mr. Halpern, Nicholas's attorney, to audit the history of our family finances. We weren't just looking at the future. We were uncovering the crimes of the past. My uncle hadn't just left me money. He had left me the truth, and that truth was about to cost my mother every cent she thought she had earned. As the audit of Nicholas's estate proceeded, Mr. Halpern pulled a file that changed the entire landscape of my past. We discovered that Angela hadn't just forgotten me at that desert rest stop when I was 13. It was a calculated move to keep me away while she systematically dismantled my future. The records showed that my birth parents had left a small but valuable plot of land intended specifically for my college fund. Years ago, while I was living with Nicholas and struggling to find my footing, my mother had forged my signature on land transfer documents to sell that property. She hadn't just abandoned me. She had committed a criminal act of forgery to fund Brianna's trophies and her own social ladder climbing. Nicholas had discovered this betrayal months before his death. He didn't confront her then. He was a man of long-term strategies, not impulsive outbursts. Instead, he had Mr. Halpern add what we called a poison pill clause to his will. It was a legal trap specifically designed to protect the abandoned niece and strip the scavengers of their power. This was the lethal discovery. It removed any remaining path to redemption for my mother. She wasn't just an ungrateful parent. She was a criminal who had stolen from her own child. The $12 million estate was now a fortress, and I held the only key. This revelation was the kill shot, the moment the narrative shifted from family drama to a clinical reckoning with the law. I looked at the forged documents, my initials mimicked in her graceful, indifferent handwriting, and felt the final thread of familial loyalty snap. Imagine a world where Nicholas hadn't intervened. I would have been an ATM for a family that stole my foundation before I even knew it existed. But Nicholas saw the crack in the foundation and reinforced it. Now, the structure was ready for the final inspection. The day of the will reading arrived, smelling of old leather and the clinical, final satisfaction of a balance sheet, finally made even. Mr. Halpern sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking as precise as a razor. Angela sat across from me, her designer tissues ready for a performance of grief, while Brianna leaned in, practically vibrating with the anticipation of a $12 million payday. My mother had spent the morning trying to convince me to act like a family, but I remained as cold and unyielding as the desert floor. Mr. Halpern cleared his throat and began reading with a voice as crisp as glass. When he reached the section regarding the remainder of Nicholas's estate, the air in the room seemed to vanish. To my estranged relatives, he read, who remembered me only when my bank balance suited their needs. I leave nothing, Angela erupted before the sentence even ended. She jumped to her feet, her face flushing crimson, and accused me of poisoning Nicholas's mind while he was frail. She shrieked that I was an ungrateful daughter and that she deserved a share of the legacy for the struggle of raising me. Silence was my primary weapon. I simply slid a manila folder across the table toward her. "This wasn't a breakdown, Mom," I said, my voice steady and clinical. "It was an audit." Inside were the forged land transfer documents from when I was 13, the ones she thought had been buried by time. I looked her directly in the eyes. "You sold my future for a designer bag and a Florida vacation. You didn't raise me. You managed a nuisance until you could profit from my disappearance." This was the power flip climax. The once authoritative mother was suddenly at her weakest, her eyes darting between the evidence and the lawyer. This is the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Angela's status was never her own. It was a fragile shell built on the resources of people she exploited. When the bank balance is gone, there is no character left to stand on. "I'm the owner of the house you're sitting in," I told her, delivering the final assessment with absolute gravity. "You have 10 minutes to collect your designer tissues and leave. My maintenance of your version of family is officially over." I stood and walked out, leaving the scavengers to choke on the dust of their own greed. The following weeks weren't about revenge. They were about reclaiming the architecture of my life. I used the $12 million legacy not to build monuments to my own ego, but to establish a foundation for children trapped in the same systems of foster care and neglect that I nearly succumbed to. I named it the Nicholas Carlton Center for Resilient Youth. I stand on the cliffside balcony of my new home now, watching the city lights shimmer like turning pages in a book I finally own. I found a final hidden letter from Nicholas tucked inside the back cover of my old leather journal. His handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. "You got here without them, Madison. Never apologize for taking up space in a world that tried to leave you at a rest stop." With a steady hand, I opened my cloud storage and scrolled through the old family photos, the mountain traditions, and the eternal sisterhood posts where I was always the invisible cameraman. I didn't feel anger as I hit delete. I felt a profound, clinical peace. I wasn't erasing my history. I was clearing the ground for a new structure. To those of you listening who have ever felt like the spare part in your own family, this is your letter. You are not background scenery. You are not a visitor in your own life. Sometimes the best way to shine is to stop asking for permission from people who only want to dim your light. You have the right to write your own chapter, on your own terms. I closed the journal with a final, peaceful snap. My world is no longer cracked. It is a solid foundation, built on truth and the quiet courage of a girl who refused to stay put. If this story resonated with you, hit the share button. Let's remind everyone that their worth isn't defined by those who fail to see it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.